You're good.
Is it going? All
Yep.
right, brilliant. Oh my. Hiya, folks. So this is kind of insane. This is actually the first ever panel I have ever hosted.
Congratulations!
I have absolutely no idea why they have given me one of the main rooms, and seeing such a turnout is a tad overwhelming, but we shall press on. I know we're less than 4 hours into this weekend so far, but are we all having a good Momocon? Yes! Alright, so today we are here to talk about one of the most beloved duos in animation, Wallace and Gromit, who have delighted viewers across the globe with their antics for almost 40 years now, across various specials, movies, and any other form of media you can think of. Even stage shows. Yep, that was a thing. If anyone knows, you know. My reason for choosing them as the topic of discussion for my first ever panel is because I firmly believe I'm the most qualified person on earth who hasn't worked at Aardman to talk about them. Before we get into all that though, I should tell you a little bit about me and what I do and why I'm here. For those who don't know, which I'm gonna assume is most of you, my name is Jake, though online I am better known as the Gladding Gladiator. And for almost 5 years now, I have made long-form video essays on YouTube where I basically talk about pieces of media from the 90s and early 2000s that I have some kind of emotional connection to. And I basically talk about, the franchise's history, its legacy, as well as the impact that it left on me. If anyone here has ever been recommended or seen a 3-hour-long video on the Ice Age movies, I'm that guy. Also, last year, I did make a video on my first ever Momocon. It's kind of this high concept journey about stepping outside your comfort zone and learning to take any risks. I'm mainly just mentioning it because it's one of my favorite things I've ever made. I've been told by several of my friends that it's one of their favorite things I've ever made, and I would love to get some more eyes on it. Getting back on topic though, in regards to my relationship with Wallace and Gromit in particular, this franchise has woven in and out of my life in a variety of ways over the years. I was born and raised in a little community called Home Firth, which is in the countryside of West Yorkshire in the United Kingdom. It also coincidentally happens to be the same place that Peter Sallis, the original voice of Wallace, is from. But until in 2019, when I moved to the town of Preston to begin my education studying musical theatre. Obviously Preston is the home place of Nick Park, the creator of Wallace and Gromit, which is why we have several statues in town that immortalise the characters. Though, despite living there, I missed every single opportunity I could have possibly had to meet him, to a point it was almost comical. Until February of this year, when I finally had the chance to meet him and he signed my copy of Curse of the Were-Rabbit. On top of all that, my first ever job straight out of university was working in an amusement park called Blackpool Pleasure Beach over the summer of 2022, where I was mainly stationed in the Wallace and Gromit gift shop, where my co-workers were utterly amazed by my ability to listen to the same 15-minute music loop for about 8 hours a day and not get tired of it. Some would call it Stockholm Syndrome, I'd call it having autism. It is a very roundabout way of saying that this institution of British culture has been ever present throughout my entire existence. So much so that I recently released a full retrospective on the series' current legacy in great detail, reviewing every mainline film and a bunch of other supplementary content. Meaning if after this is over, you want to hear me talk even more about Wallace and Gromit for a very specific 2 hours and 19 minutes, you can check out that video. I will also be hopefully posting an edited version of this panel to my channel, so this is essentially an epilogue or additional extra to that video. Because there is one topic that I want to discuss in that video, but I couldn't find a natural way to include it. So instead, we're doing it live. I want to focus on a certain interpretation of Wallace and Gromit that I have never really been on board with. It's one that re-emerges every time there is a new piece of media that releases, though it really reached a fever pitch this year with Vengeance Most Foul. In online fandom spaces, there seems to be this persistent belief that the relationship between Wallace and Gromit is toxic. that Gromit would be better off if he left Wallace, who doesn't really care for him. Now, I fully understand why this viewpoint exists. A lot of Wallace and Gromit stories begin with the mad inventor acting without considering the feelings of his trusted but silent companion, and we'll discuss later. That is essentially the status quo of this world, because it makes it a lot easier for the team at Aardman to tell these stories. And you can't say it hasn't been successful for them. I mean, 4 Oscar awards ain't anything to sneeze at. But as far as this perspective on the characters go, I disagree heavily, because it lacks proper nuance and the context of why these characters were created this way. It focuses on a few isolated moments for the purpose of villainizing Wallace instead of the greater picture of their relationship as a whole. And seeing as Wallace is one of my favourite animated characters ever, I feel it falls on me to set the record straight once and for all. So here is what I'm going to do. We're going to go through every major piece of Wallace and Gromit production in chronological order. And by major productions, I mean the original trilogy, Curse of the Were-Rabbit, A Matter of Life and Death, and Vengeance Most Foul. We're not going to talk about any external media like shorts or advertisements because they don't contribute to the overall narrative this franchise sometimes tries to have. We're going to look at each one individually, examine how it handles the relationship to see if it changes over time, and if it's really as toxic as people say. So let's throw it all the way back to 1989 with the release of Wallace and Gromit's first adventure in A Grand Day Out. Naturally, being the world's introduction to this pair of icons, their first adventure doesn't really provide that much insight into the inner machinations of their relationship. Mainly because, at this point, Gromit didn't really have much of a defined personality that later films would develop. Because at this time, there was no later films. This was originally envisioned as Nick Park's graduation project for the National Film and Television School in Buckinghamshire. And he quickly realised that it would not be ready for graduation, in fact taking him 7 years and the help of a small studio in Bristol to finally finish it. As a result, this is Wallace and Gromit in their most simplistic forms, down to them not even really being the focus of the story. Because when you stop and analyse it, you quickly realise that A Grand Day Out is not about a man and his dog travelling to the moon to see if it's really made of cheese. A Grand Day Out is the story of the coin-operated gas cooker, who tries to make its impossible dreams a reality upon falling in love with the concept of skiing. Once Wallace and Gromit arrive on the moon, they become background details as the true star takes centre stage. That is not to say there is nothing we can glean about their relationship based on their interactions during this film, because it actually has a lot to say about their dynamic, especially in comparison to what would follow. Mainly, there seems to be very little, if any, of the power imbalance that we'll see take shape in later films. In A Grand Day Out, Gromit is given just as much autonomy as Wallace. Yes, there's the moment where Wallace calls him down to hold up the door. A necessary evil at this moment is what made Nick Park realise Gromit would make an excellent silent protagonist. From this point onwards, we witness Gromit help build the rocket, one of the few times in the franchise we see the pair actively working together, as well as fly it, which to me demonstrates the amount of trust and confidence that Wallace places in Gromit. In return, Gromit appears fully supportive of these big ideas, whereas in the future, he'll grow far more apprehensive and disdainful of Wallace's inventions. But here, he seems to be having a pretty nice time, despite 1 or 2 annoyances, such as when his house of cards gets knocked down. And it's in that very rocket-building montage where the almost symbiotic nature of their relationship makes itself known. Wallace is the master, the idea guy, who dreams up this crazy adventure but fumbles during the actual construction, residing to mostly focus on the decoration and aesthetic aspects of the rocket. Whereas Gromit is the mind with the fortitude to carry out these big ideas and actually see them to fruition. A role that he doesn't seem all too fussed about, especially since in the beginning we see him reading a book titled Electronics for Dogs. While Gromit will remain hyper-intelligent, he will never be shown to possess this level of technical prowess again, which I understand because had this aspect remained, Wallace's future inventions wouldn't have been able to cause problems, as Gromit could quite easily fix them. But I liked this idea that the pair had this shared interest from the beginning. There is a foundation of a very strong relationship here. Though you can make an argument that this is because there really wasn't any outside force putting any strain on their bond or creating conflict between them, which is where the strength of their love would truly be tested. The Wrong Trousers, 1993. First premiering on the BBC on Christmas Day, The Wrong Trousers brought back the characters in an ever slightly more grounded story that focuses on much more of their connection, as a new villain seeks to come between them in the form of a penguin jewel thief called Feathers McGraw. I said it was a little more grounded. Though for any of that to happen, there needs to be some kind of weakness within their relationship that can be exploited, which is where the perfect power imbalance that we saw in A Grande Out starts leaning to one side. To put it simply, Wallace is not presented in the best light here, and the story doesn't really allow him to showcase his more redeeming qualities, because of how tight everything needed to be, leaving no room for the characters to process anything that happens to them. This is the first instance in which Wallace's short-sightedness has manifested in him being rather thoughtless towards Gromit or taking him for granted, and on his birthday no less. Unlike in A Grande Out, we see a lot more of Gromit being treated as a dog, with Wallace's present for him being a machine that can take him on walks, presumably so Wallace no longer has to. These opening scenes are the first thing we can point to as evidence that Wallace constantly mistreats Gromit, though, as I said, I feel that interpretation doesn't take into account the story being told and the context behind Wallace and why he is the way he is, mainly how his environment has contributed to it. Wallace is a man from the north of England, loosely inspired by Nick Park's own father. But if there's one thing you need to know about us northerners, it's that we're not really great at communicating our emotions in a healthy way, often repressing anything that could be seen as vulnerable, which is something Wallace struggles with often, as we've witnessed him get his heart broken on multiple occasions, yet it only takes him a few seconds to get over it and move on. Not processing his grief, but by pushing down any unpleasant emotions and trying to distract himself. I mean, take a look at A Matter of Loaf and Death, where we see how this unhealthy mentality of always moving forward has manifested. Wallace literally watches the love of his life, the woman that he is engaged to, die right in front of him, and then a few seconds later, he's off about to make himself a cup of tea. I mean, she was also a serial killer trying to add him to her baker's dozen of victims, but it seemingly takes him no time to process any of this, because he isn't. What we see in The Wrong Trousers and in future stories isn't that Wallace doesn't deeply care for Gromit, because he does. He genuinely thought that Gromit would enjoy his present, which he spent a lot of money on. I mean, the Techno Trousers are pretty much the most iconic piece of technology in this entire franchise, and they weren't even invented by Wallace, as he says they are ex-NASA. We never quite find out how much money Wallace spent on them, but it was probably a pretty penny, especially considering that he is currently undergoing serious financial struggles. Yet he still paid that because he genuinely thought Gromit would enjoy this gift. The Wrong Trousers was the first Wallace and Gromit production to be written by Bob Baker, who would then contribute to every mainline film going forward until 2010. And it's impossible to discuss these characters going forward without addressing his influence, because his main goal in the 20 years that he worked with them was to expand their relationship and explore the inner workings to treat these pieces of clay as truly human. In the book, The World of Wallace and Gromit by Andy Lane, published in 2003, Bob Baker says, "It's easy to misunderstand the appeal of Wallace and Gromit. Superficially, it's all about a man who makes silly inventions and a dog who gets caught testing them. Isn't it? Actually, no. It's really about how the relationship between the man and his dog keeps getting stretched to a breaking point, but never quite snaps." This quote illuminates why this is the status quo as we continue on this journey. I'd like you to keep these words in mind the further we go into this, because they are the key to everything. The main goal of The Wrong Trousers in the greater scope of the series was to refine Gromit and position him as the true star of the franchise, the one who uses his cunning and resourcefulness to stay one step ahead of the bad guys and rescue Wallace from whatever mess he's tangled up in. These updated versions of the characters create the perfect odd couple, with traits that balance each other out as they are two sides of the same coin. Gromit is more calculated and contains all the common sense that Wallace lacks, who is entirely improvisational. Because of that, the film pretty much only shows the relationship from Gromit's perspective, exploring the grief he feels as something comes between him and Wallace, which leads to him making the difficult decision to leave the house after his space has been entirely taken over. It also marks the first time in the entire franchise in which a character has shed tears, if we're not counting the gas cooker from A Grande Out. However, following his dramatic exit, that element of the story is entirely dropped and receives no closure. The reason for this is likely due to the runtime. All three of the original short films began with scripts that would far exceed the half-hour runtime, causing drastic cuts to be made and the stories to be heavily condensed down only to their most intrinsic elements. So much as Bob Baker may have wanted to explore the complexities of the pair's dynamic, this was as far as he was able to go given the amount of screen time he had to work with. And it leads to Gromit leaving feeling more like a plot device than any meaningful statement about the characters. Because as soon as he's left, we don't get anything beyond that. Wallace never even has a chance to find out that his dog left because we've got to keep the story moving. Feathers has to, enact his plan, control the techno trousers, and start sizing up the museum. 1995's A Close Shave is the yin to the wrong trousers yang. They balance each other out, much like Wallace and Gromit themselves. And this was mainly because Nick Park was taking more of a back seat, as it was kind of a cruel twist of fate where the more successful Wallace and Gromit became, the less time Nick Park had to work on them. So the Close Shave story was mainly developed by Bob Baker, essentially giving him free rein to do whatever he wanted. And he took full advantage of that opportunity, because compared to almost everything in this franchise, A Close Shave is unique in that it places a large focus on the complex relationships with a more grounded human story. It's less of a farce than the previous two, and is really interested in what makes these characters tick, which finally gave us some insight into how Wallace feels about Gromit. It is here the first time that we see Wallace is allowed to be truly vulnerable. Because when Gromit is arrested for the crimes that Preston commits, because that's the whole conceit of the story, that Wallace is so infatuated with the new and suspiciously similar-looking Gwendoline that he does not see the signs that Gromit is being set up to take the fall for Gwendoline and Preston's crimes, which is when he gets thrown in jail, and the further we see over the next few months as Gromit's charges get more serious, we see Wallace become increasingly more distraught, to a point where he starts crying over it. How could anyone look at this image and say with confidence that Wallace does not love Gromit? Because he may be severely repressed, but the only one who can bring out this emotional side to him, these complexities, is Gromit, which we'll see time and time again from beyond this point. Because in the following scene, we see Wallace and his new herd of rescue sheep rescue Gromit out of prison and plan to help him go on the run, despite the fact that Wallace is clueless. For all he knows, Gromit could have actually done it, yet he is still perfectly willing to go through with this and risk getting arrested himself because the thought of never seeing Gromit again was too distressful for him. It's like Bob Baker said, the wrong trousers and A Close Shave introduce and test the elasticity between the characters, where no matter how far apart they are pulled, they always find their way back to each other. However, there still was the issue of Bob Baker not being able to go as in-depth as he wanted due to the restrictions of the runtime. If he was going to fulfill his vision, he was going to need a much bigger canvas. Thankfully, he only had to wait 10 years for it. In the fall of 2005, Aardman's flagship IP made the inevitable jump from broadcast television to major motion picture, when they released Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Now with a full 80 minutes to fill up, Nick Park, Bob Baker, and the rest of the creative team were finally able to tell a story as complex and ambitious as they always wanted, which meant more room for the characters to breathe and more time to explore how they feel about each other. And we see this from almost the very beginning, as Gromit is attempting to convince Wallace to make some dietary changes for the sake of his health, showing genuine concern that goes beyond rescuing him from dangerous criminals. And Wallace acknowledges Gromit's concern and feelings on the matter in his own way. He does try to embrace this change for the sake of Gromit, and I mean, trying to brainwash himself is a tad extreme, but he's still doing it with the intention of making his dog feel better and without arguing about it. It also ties into this running idea throughout the film of, is a person truly capable of change? Which has multiple meanings, both in the physical changes that Wallace undergoes as a result of the titular curse, and how Gromit is trying to encourage him to make a positive change to his lifestyle, and the question of, will he be able to embrace it without trying to cheat the process? Which, that side of it is never really gets an answer as far as the film's ending goes. However, Wallace's attempts to play God by brainwashing the town's rabbit population to be disgusted by vegetables seriously backfire, causing him to transform into a giant were-rabbit, leaving a path of vegetation destruction each night as Gromit slowly pieces it together and now has to not only convince Wallace that he is the monster they are trying to catch, but save him from an overzealous trophy hunter who has his own reasons for getting involved and is out for blood. We see this later on in the film, where we get another moment of Wallace being truly vulnerable. Upon realizing that his rabbit brain has now inhibited his desire and ambition to invent, that he can no longer even figure out how to fix his own machine, he begins breaking down, and Gromit goes to comfort him, because again, the only one who can bring out this more emotional and complex side of Wallace is Gromit. But then we skip to the very ending of the film. Gromit has saved the day yet again, thwarting the hunter and rescuing his friend, only for him to let go of the rope he was holding and, in a moment of celebration, begins plummeting to the ground. Without hesitation, Wallace dives to catch Gromit and embracing him in an attempt to cushion his fall, though as a result, he is seemingly fatally injured. Really think about that. Wallace, knowingly and without hesitation, sacrifices his life for Gromit, and a few minutes earlier, we saw how difficult it is for his mind to even temporarily gain control of the beast. When he has to prove his identity to Lady Tottington, it takes him a few seconds to gain that control as his hands violently shake as he tries to get them into their normal position. Yet here, seemingly acting completely on instinct, when Gromit is in peril, his only thought is to save his friend, no matter the consequences. Gromit has jumped into dangerous situations to risk his life for Wallace countless times before, but this was the first time that we saw that if it came down to it, Wallace is perfectly willing to do the same. Here's the thing about the ending of this film that has always confused me. They never explain why the beast is gone following Wallace's sacrifice. You can say it's because, well, he died, but he didn't actually die, because if he had died, no amount of sniffing cheese was ever going to bring him back. In revisiting it after all this time as I was working on my video, I believe that I have some kind of answer. And maybe it's a stretch, but hear me out. Wallace became the were-rabbit through use of the mind manipulation Omatic, a device he created so that he'd be able to stick to Gromit's new diet plan, while completely ignoring his friend's feelings on using technology to solve this purely emotional issue. His tunnel vision is once more causing him to even unintentionally disregard Gromit's feelings and act selfishly. Yet in his final moments, he prioritizes Gromit above all else in a wholly selfless act. Then, shortly after, the curse is lifted, returning him to normal. Call me crazy, but I fully believe what actually broke the curse was his love for Gromit, shown through his sacrifice, and a full 8 years before Frozen got praised for doing the exact same thing. But that theory does support the idea of the theme of the film that can a person really change, that has been present all throughout. The villain was defeated not because he was being pompous or overzealous, but because he was not only incapable of change, but outright refused it. Whereas Wallace is saved because he was able to grow from this experience. In fact, you could argue that this was a conclusion to his character arc that began in the wrong trousers, of learning to appreciate Gromit even though he still has a lot of emotional walls up, which weren't coming down anytime soon. Though, unfortunately, the next story kind of takes a step back in that regard, which is a pity because A Matter of Loaf and Death is my favourite Wallace and Gromit production.
Mine too.
Debuting in 2008, A Matter of Loaf and Death marked the return of the half-hour format that audiences had grown accustomed to, though with a much darker and sinister twist, with the plot this time involving a serial killer who plans to make Wallace their next victim. It's a psychological horror of epic proportions with fantastic music, cinematography, and lighting that touches upon some surprisingly mature ideas in a very tactful way. As for how the film handled Wallace and Gromit's relationship, it doesn't really reinvent the wheel or even spin it all that much, returning to that status quo of the pair not communicating properly, causing Wallace to disregard Gromit's feelings for the most part, which once more allows an outside force to drive a wedge between them, in this case taking the form of Paella Bakewell. This has always been the status quo of Wallace and Gromit's relationship. It always seems to reset by the start of the next adventure because that's the easiest way to justify these kind of stories. Whenever a new threat enters the picture, they quickly single Gromit out as the one major obstacle standing in their way, so they find a way to incapacitate him and force him out of the picture so as to immobilize him, because most of the time their plan involves manipulating Wallace in some form, which is much easier when Gromit isn't around. Feathers McGraw drives him out of the house, Preston frames him for the attacks on the sheep, and Paella finds a way to make him a prisoner in his own home. Only way for this to work is for Wallace to be at least somewhat dismissive of Gromit in the beginning, exposing a weakness in their relationship that the villain will then be able to exploit. You can't really prove that their bond is unbreakable unless you show how far it can be stretched. But because this isn't the only way that they think they can tell these stories, it has led to that idea that Wallace doesn't care for Gromit, which is where this whole thing stems from. It's not an issue with the characters, it's an issue with the storytelling. That 4 out of 5 pieces of long-form Wallace and Gromit media all follow this exact same setup. And because this is how they decided that most of these stories needed to start, it prevents the characters from having undergone any meaningful development. It's funny how much of a big deal I made about Curse of the Were-Rabbit having a theme of can a person really change, when if they were to actually have a story in which Wallace and Gromit work on their lack of communication and are more emotionally vulnerable with each other, that would kind of render the entire formula that they've clung to for the past 30 years entirely obsolete. So the question is, would they be willing to do that? After 15 years of waiting, we finally received an answer in the form of the 2024 Netflix co-production Vengeance Most Foul, which not only had the difficult task of introducing wider audiences to Ben Whitehead as the new voice of Wallace, but followed up the duo's most defining adventure, as the second feature-length movie is also a sequel to The Wrong Trousers, featuring the much-anticipated return of Feathers McGraw. Beyond that, though, it's also a discussion on the pros and cons of technological advancement, and what aspects of our humanity we are willing to give up for the sake of convenience, which I likely do not have to explain why that's a very poignant message for a film crafted entirely by human hands to make in this current social climate. What matters in this discussion is how the film uses this concept of technological advancement to demonstrate how the pair have become more divided than ever. Gromit is having his space constantly invaded by Wallace's vaulting ambition and his various contraptions, while the inventor fails to see the harm that his ambition is causing his friend, especially when it comes to the homogenization of Gromit's garden, stripping it of all personality and colour, much to his dismay. Wallace simply fails to understand that he is hurting far more than he is helping, because he struggles to grasp the idea that foregoing the quick and easy option to toil away on something, for Wallace being an inventor who spends his hours toiling away in his cellar trying to create new and innovative ideas and takes such pride in being able to craft something with his own bare hands, he doesn't understand that sometimes the most stressful and hard-working way can be the most effective, and that something that you can take pride in can be its own reward. And pretty soon, that is all going to come crashing down around him, because Feathers McGraw finds a way to hack into his latest invention, smart gnomes, and use them to help him escape prison. which leads to many acts of petty gardening theft, with Wallace being blamed, causing the police to confiscate all his inventions for examination, leaving him in a dejected and honestly pathetic state where he doesn't even remember how to use a teapot. And then Gromit runs off so he can track down the missing gnomes to prove Wallace's innocence. However, with his machines taken away and now his loyal dog also missing, Wallace is left completely alone, giving him a chance to reflect on his actions and realize which of those two things is actually the most important to him. It's the culmination of the running idea that Gromit is the only person who can get Wallace to occasionally bring down his emotional walls. He is still deeply a repressed man who feels uncomfortable with expressing his more unpleasant emotions, let's say, which takes us to the climax of the movie. There it is. This ending of Vengeance Most Foul is extremely poignant and meaningful, especially for someone who has been a fan and, I guess in many ways, I guess this franchise has kind of been a guardian angel to me my entire life when you think about it. It's just been ever-present, a shadow over me. That's the word I'm looking for. So when Gromit ends up in peril, once again, on the end of this teetering houseboat, with his only chance at survival being to hand feathers over the blue diamond, Wallace is the tipping point, finally being able to emotionally and openly express how much he loves him. It's wild that after 35 years of this character, he was finally able to overcome this emotional hurdle that for the longest time has defined him. And it's kind of brilliant that this was the ending of a film that was a sequel to The Wrong Trousers, which is where all these ideas that I've talked about pretty much originate from, creating an impression of everything really coming full circle, and in many ways, feeling like a definitive ending, especially in regards to how the relationship and it plays into that classic formula. There's always the option that they will merely just reset it all again in 10 years when we get another film, but I don't know. Something about this time feels different. The final battle showcases the duo working together again once more, exactly as they had done almost 40 years ago when they first built that rocket to fly to the moon. Here, Wallace isn't comic relief as he is in A Close Shave, or he isn't in distress as he is in The Wrong Trousers. Here, he is mostly an active participant in saving the day alongside Gromit, which is something we've never truly seen before, not on this scale at least. By the time Vengeance Most Foul released, it had been 3 years since Bob Baker had passed away. But in this film, and these moments, you see the fruits of his labor and the completion of his vision. And if you ask me, it was more than worth the wait. Aww. Don't we all just love this moment? This is the vindication for 40 years. Which brings us to our conclusion, because that pretty much sums up everything I have to say on these two, as with this panel, I have now talked about Wallace and Gromit for just about over 3 collective hours, and I have nothing left to say. I think if there is a lesson to take away from this, it would be that when analysing media, try to avoid any sweeping generalisations that fail to acknowledge the whole picture, even if it is a meme, which I acknowledge most of the Wallace secretly hates Gromit crowd is. If there's a prevalent idea in your fandom that you think is not founded in good faith, don't be afraid to challenge it, because when you look hard enough and completely envelop yourself in the text, you'll find depth and nuance in the most surprising of places, even in a man who makes silly inventions and a dog who gets caught testing them. I did do it. My first ever panel. That wasn't so bad. Now, it was spectacular! Somebody get this guy laughing! For the remaining allotted time, I'm going to open up the floor for questions and answers, be they about Wallace and Gromit, my channel, or the pains that come with being British. I'm all ears. And also, while supplies last, if you come up and ask a question, you will be able to take home one of these vintage Wallace and Gromit figurines from the mid-90s.
Sweet!
So, if anyone has any questions, just come right up. Just maybe like try and form like an orderly line. I've never done this before. I have no idea how this thing works. You were the start of the line. You're the start of the line. Okay. Do you want to come up and?
There's a lot of questions.
This was about more or less media analyzation of Wallace and Gromit, and more or less the way in which Wallace and Gromit has been released over the years via physical media digitalized. I don't know why, but for some reason BBC just doesn't really. I just think BBC really cares about Gromit that much. As much as I want to praise them, I feel like the physical media releases for Wallace and Gromit have gone downgrading quality each year. And as mentioned, it premiered on the BBC in December 4th. Originally, when Wallace was opening the card, it was, instead of for He's a Jolly Good Fellow, it played the Happy Birthday song.
Yes.
But the problem was, Warner Brothers was collecting royalties at the time, despite the song not being copyrighted. It took them 15 years to realize, oh, it's not copyrighted. The newer releases, it is still for He's a Jolly Good Fellow. At least for the US and the UK releases, if anyone notices that.
Yeah.
Do you think, and it's not just that song too, it's also How Much Is That Dog in the Window being played in the Fetish with Brian's door. Do you feel like that is the definitive version of Wallace and Gromit and that should be preserved commercially wise?
I think it's very interesting to talk about the BBC and their treatment of Wallace and Gromit. Because in early 2010, there was a TV show called World of Invention, which was basically the last piece of major Wallace and Gromit media that featured Peter Sallis voicing Wallace. And ever since it finished airing, the BBC nor Aardman have shown any interest in trying to preserve it, which I think is a real shame because it has a lot of significance as it is not only the last piece of Wallace and Gromit media, besides a few advertisements to feature Peter Sallis, but the last one that Bob Baker worked on.
Right.
So I think there is kind of this overlying issue of how the BBC has treated Wallace and Gromit, despite it, being such a huge success for them. They are in all the advertisements every single year. We always, in the UK, we watch them every single December. I think it's kind of a bigger discussion on how the BBC treats Wallace and Gromit. If you want to continue this, I'm more than happy to do it outside afterwards. I'm just caught.
I apologize.
Oh no, it's fine. Yeah, just take any of them. Just take any one of them. Yeah. Okay. Hi. Sorry. I'm woefully unprepared.
I don't know. Growing up, whenever I would watch Curse the Were-Rabbit, I always thought Toddington and Wallace are really cute together. I hope they live happily ever after. And then I found out they never got together because, I don't know, she was richer than him or something, or it just didn't work out. And I was like, what? Basically my question is, do you think Wallace and Toddington should have ended up together, or do you think they were just better off as, friends?
That is a very good question. It means kind of discussing Wallace's love life, which is tumultuous at best, because he really knows how to pick them. As far as Tottenham goes, there is actually, I don't know if you've seen it, in the early 2020s, they did a series of advertisements for a sofa store called DFS. And there is actually one of those ads which features Lady Tottington with Helena Bottom Carter reprising her role that heavily implies that her and Wallace are still together on some form. I mean, it ends with him giving her a foot massage, so... as far as the three relationships of Wallace goes at this point in the franchise, Tottington was the most healthy, because she didn't get his dog arrested and didn't try to kill him.
Yeah.
But I think there's kind of something to say that Wallace isn't really meant to end up with anyone, because doing that kind of disrupts the dynamic that he and Gromit share. And again, it kind of goes back to, if we pair up with Wallace with someone, we can't have his love life be a source of conflict anymore.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's true.
right. Would you like one of these figurines?
Oh, yes, please.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I will choose.
Sorry, I don't have a Lady Tossington. These were only made in the 90s.
No, you're so good. I think I'll get a little Gromit.
Yeah,
Thank
Gromit.
you so much.
Yeah. Right, next please.
Yeah, no, I'm...
Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, I'm woefully unprepared for this.
No, I'm curious. If you were given the opportunity to write a Wallace and Gromit story, how would it go? What's like the one thing you would like to see happen?
That is an incredibly good question. The one thing that I would do in a Wallace and Gromit story is do the one thing this franchise has never done, besides like the opening credits where we see like pictures. I would include some flashbacks to when Gromit was a lot younger, so that would give us a lot more greater insight into both his upbringing, as like how they came to meet, and I think it would also show a much softer side of Wallace that would, lessen the criticism that he's received. That's pretty much the only thing I would include. I don't really know how I would do like a story, because that would involve like making a villain. I think I'd want it to be a Christmas special, because it's really weird that how heavily linked Wallace and Gromit are to the festive season, yet there's never been any attempt to do a long-form story of them during the holidays. Especially because you could, like, mystery and, like, if they want to do murder again, they could do murder again. Like, you could have, like, a really dark holiday special with them. That would just be incredible.
That would be interesting. I like to see like an origin story, like how they met, how they got together, how
Yeah.
they came to be. I love that kind of story, the character development like that.
Would you like a figure? Next, please.
I just wanted to know if you like Shaun the Sheep as well, to be honest.
I love Shaun the Sheep. I love the first movie especially. The second one, I love it. I think it has some great emotional moments, some great beats in it. I think it gets a little too out there for my personal tastes. With the recent announcement of the third one, I kind of just want them to make something like the first one again, a really grounded story that focuses on the connections between the characters. As for the Shaun the Sheep TV show, I watched that all the time growing up. I do have a very strong affinity for like those characters and everything. I think it would be very difficult to do like a long-form analysis of Shaun the Sheep, because it is, design-wise very simple. But fantastic question. Would you like a Wallace and Gromit figurine?
I'd like Shaun the Sheep.
You'd like a Shaun? Hi.
Oh wow, okay. I just wanted to follow up on something you said earlier, which was, the wrong trousers you said aired on Christmas?
I might have got that wrong. It might have been Boxing Day.
Oh, well,
It aired around that time, because every single one of them has, except Curse the Wereof, which came out in October.
So why do you think they did it on Robin's birthday and not a Christmas thing? Like, I think that would have been a good opportunity, and following up on what you said.
I think it's mainly just because, like, when they're making these films, they don't know when they're going to release.
Oh, fair.
So you've got to imagine it takes them like 9 months to make this stuff, and as we saw with The Grand Day Out, which took 7 years, despite Nick Park thinking it'd take them about 6 months. Oftentimes deadlines are not met; things need to be pushed back. So I think it mainly just came down to the fact that they weren't aware when it was going to release.
Okay, well that makes sense.
Hello.
Hey, so
Hi.
what would you say is your absolute favorite thing Aardman has ever made? Like, it can include Wallace and Gromit or not.
I'll do one Wallace and Gromit one non-Wallace and Gromit one. I've always said A Matter of Loaf and Death is my favourite Wallace and Gromit production. I just think it is artistically such an amazing piece of animation, especially just that final battle as well. And as for just Aardman in general, I honestly think my favourite thing they've ever done is the pirates in an adventure with scientists, or as you'd all know it, pirates abandoned misfits.
I need to watch both of those again. Thanks for the recommendation.
Yeah. Next, please.
Alright, well, I feel like this is a question I already know the answer to, but it kind of made me rethink perspective on it. So, really, in my own head, I theorized that Shaun the Sheep and Wallace and Gromit are in the same universe, and in the first movie stated, Shaun grew up on the farm, and then inadvertently met Wallace and Gromit for a while, stayed with them, and of course they eventually returned to the farm. So I wonder, do you think that they had something of a lasting relationship, Wallace and Gromit and Shaun, that they still think about each other from time to time? How deep do you think that relationship goes?
It's difficult to say because Wallace and Gromit is kind of infamous for not having that much connective tissue between installments, at least not until Vengeance on the Skull with the return of Peter Kay as PC Macintosh and Feathers McGraw, obviously. As far as do they think about Shaun? I certainly think they do. He definitely left an impression. He saved their lives. It's kind of difficult to forget someone like that. There is actually a short from the early 2000s that depicts Shaun still living with the pair from the series Cracking Contraptions. It's called Shop of 13.
That's literally my favorite short. My favorite Cracking Contraptions.
Thank you very much for your question. Alright, we are running a bit low. We've only got a few Wendelines, Prestons, and Sean's left, so I'm very sorry if you're not able to have a figure. Next year, I promise I will bring more.
I got it.
Oh, sorry.
What would you say is your favorite character?
My favourite character? Obviously, I love Gromit. Silent protagonist is absolutely incredible. It's the way that they're able to show you his entire thought process with just a simple move of his brow. But Wallace holds a special place in my heart. It's I love just, how ambitious he is. How ambitious if short-sighted. I think he is a realistically flawed, but ultimately very funny and likeable character. Would you like one of these? Yep, one of Shaun. Alright, we have 2 Prestons and 2 Wendelines left. Next, please.
Alright, I have a more general question.
Yes.
You have a YouTube channel that contains long-form video essays.
Yes, I do.
Of varied media.
Yes.
What do you think is at the root of the recent rise of such content? I think it comes from intellectualism and a pursuit of learning. What do you think?
I would certainly agree with that. For me personally, it just comes from wanting to talk about the things I love, and being from the UK where a lot of American entertainment has never really been able to cross over with a few exceptions, it really became an outlet for me, and I think that's what it is for most people, to discuss things that they love and have a chance to share them with other people and build community.
That's inspiring, thank you.
Next, please.
Out of all the contraptions in the Cracking Contraptions, what do you think was the best one?
Cracking Contraptions, I think it is Shop of 13. I think it's the most ambitious. I love the comedy of how they turn this simple trip to the shops into this life or death mission. It's and also obviously it's a loving send up to the film Apollo 13. It's my favourite. I did actually rank them all in my video, so I do have a pretty good idea. I also love the bulletproof vest because of just the opening of that and how cinematic it is with the blue lighting, and it perfectly nails the horror atmosphere. Thank you very much. Hey!
Hey, good to see you again, man.
Nice seeing you too.
I wanted to ask, have you ever actually tried the Wensleydale?
I have actually. When I got really into Wallace and Gromit, when World of Invention came out, I did get my mum to buy me some. I did quite enjoy it. I really want to visit the Wensleydale factory. I was planning to do it for the video, but the train ride was a tad too expensive. So, thank you very much. Next, please.
I was actually going to ask a question about that. Why Wensleydale in particular? Is it because it's a loaf? Does it have super fancy?
To put it simply,
and how delicious was it?
It was very good. I mean, it's cheese. I love all kinds of cheese. I am very much like Wallace in that sense. But as for why they picked Wensleydale, the simple answer is just because Nick Park thought it was a funny name to say, and it would be a funny name to animate it. And it also did contribute to Wallace having that wide mouth we all know, because it was the way that Peter Sallis was enunciate certain vowels. So, and also for A Grand Day Out, which is one of the main reasons it took so long, Nick Park chose to animate every single individual movement of Wallace's mouth rather than having replacement mouths, which they do now. So that was a lot more time-consuming process, and he was just trying to have some fun, and he just thought, let's make him say this like, Wensleydale.
Has Wallace and Gromit changed your perspective on cheese at all? Because as a kid, I did not enjoy cheese at all until I watched Wallace and Gromit.
I love cheese on everything. When it came to Wallace and Gromit, though, it did kind of increase my love of it.
Exactly.
And it's like, sometimes I will literally just put some shredded cheddar in a bowl and just eat that. That's how bad it gets. Thank you very much. Next, please.
We know that the moon is made of cheese.
We do.
But why is it made of cheese?
The creator of the universe got peckish one night. That's the best answer I've got.
The asteroid that hit the dinosaurs was the cheese.
It was. All right, and this is our last question because I'm really conscious that we're probably out of time.
Could you please do your best impression of your favorite Gromit expression?
Oh, famous. All right. Let's think. Famous Gromit expression. It's probably Curse of the Were-Rabbit when he's like in the car and he's doing his knitting. So let's see. Let me move my hair out of my fringe so you can actually try and see my eyebrows. Okay, it looks like that's all we have time for. If there's anyone that still wants to ask a question, I'll be hanging around outside for a few more minutes. Thank you all very much for coming and have a great rest of your Momocon.